Hello, my name is Thomas Sauvin. I'm a visual artist based between Paris and Beijing, and my practice focuses on Chinese found photography. Beijing Silver Mine is an archive of over 1 million negatives that I rescued from a recycling plant on the outskirts of Beijing over the years. They are quite an amazing record of the everyday life in China, in Beijing, in a 20-year period of very rapid change. In May 2009, I went to this recycling plant and I met this guy who is actually specialized in recycling trashes that contain silver nitrate. So he had mountains of discarded films that were about to be destroyed, so he can actually extract the silver nitrate. So the reason why he was gathering them was because of the silver. So quite naturally, I decided to call the project Beijing Silver Mine. So I've been sharing quite a few photos from this project on Chinese social media, and it happened a few times that people recognized relatives. And there's a few very touching stories, but there's one that's really close to my heart. One day, someone contacted me and said, "This is the father of a very good friend of mine." So I managed to get in touch with the daughter of that man, and the photo that was involved is a photo that I absolutely love. There is a man who is like posing on a stone in the middle of a river, a bit like a mermaid. And the photo is very beautiful and very funny. And I found it in 2010 at the very beginning of the project. And I've used it in many exhibitions all over the world. And I feel like I've been traveling with that person. It was kept for so many years in someone's drawer. It was thrown away in 2009, probably, retrieved by myself in 2010 as it was about to be destroyed, shared on Chinese social media in 2015. Then the connection was made. I could meet this person again, offer a gigantic print of it. Then the print is now sitting next to that person in his bedroom. That's quite an amazing life for a photo. When it started in May 2009, I buy a bag of negatives by the kilo, like you would buy potatoes. And I brought this back to the studio. I went through it, and I thought maybe that would be the only bag. And it was already a lot, 50 kilos of negatives is a lot. And then the guy called me again and say, "I have more. Are you interested?" And it's been 17 years that he does that. So how can I possibly stop? So every time I get a new bag, the workflow begins by simply taking a few days to actually discover the content of the bag with a light box and a magnifier. That's the role of Lucky. There's like 3 main brand of film: Kodak, Fuji, and Lucky. Lucky is the Chinese one. And this is a step that's really close to my heart because despite the dust and the smell, it's a very beautiful way to experience these images for the first time. I've always been in love with analog photography because I think this is an absolutely magical object, the capacity of putting a piece of plastic in a plastic box, pressing a button, then you expose this material to light and shadows for a fraction of time, and then it's actually engraved in that film for forever is something that I find absolutely magical. I'm not the author of the photo. This is object that I found, but there's an interesting relationship that I have with them, is that these are photos that I rescued. If I didn't do this project, this photo would no longer exist. And that's very important because it gives me a sort of paternity, you know? When I see these photos, I just know that I played a role in their existence. And it gives me freedom that has its limits, of course, but it gives me a sort of freedom to actually call this photo mine in a way. I mean, not being Chinese is actually very important for this project. What's crucial, I think, is the question of distance. Neither too close nor too far. I am not Chinese, and this is because I am not Chinese that I had this curiosity for what is considered banal, for the everyday. On the other hand, it's because I've spent 12 years of my adult life in China that I could understand and that I could see the cultural and historical value of this photo. When these images come to me, they're already absolutely decontextualized in a way. I don't know who these people are, and I probably never will. And of course, what I look at is personal, intimate memory, but very soon, since they are mixed together with so many photos, then they become something else. They become something new. They enter the world of collective memory. I'm very interested in that phenomenon with found photography, where it feels like quantity is more important than quality. You have a few images, then you have a very personal, intimate story. You have hundreds of thousands of photos, then you have the portrait of a place and a time. I love the idea that actually by rescuing these photos and by taking so much time looking at them and bringing them together, then it tells something different. It tells something about collective memory, it tells something about history. If I had to name a few, I would probably mention the way in the early 90s, the way women were being captured next to their refrigerator. The kitchen were too small to actually have the fridge. So the fridge would end up in the living room and would naturally be decorated with a little statue and a poster next to it. And then a photo would be shot next to the fridge. So that's something I cannot invent. That's something a photojournalist couldn't record. It's too close to life, it's too close to everydayness. Only everyday people shooting their family moment without artistic intention, without any intention to actually create an historical record, could capture these little things. So how do I spot patterns? Actually, it's a very natural process. Just by observing and contemplating the photos again and again, but you just have to be pretty attentive to the patterns and the repetitions. And for example, I would be looking at the photos and then I'd bump into a photo with twins. Twins, similar twins. They look the same, they are dressed the same way. That's an unusual photo, so I would put it aside. And then I keep on looking the photos for months and months, and then I would bump into a second image with other twins, similar, dressed the same way. And one day, when I have like 25, 30 photos that I put all together, then I will realize that the parents who had similar twins would not only dress them the same way, But also when they photograph them, they would make sure to photograph them in front of twin elements. It could be two figures in the background, it could be two buildings. So this photo has a perfect like left and right symmetry to it. When it comes to exhibitions, I usually don't try to explain the images too much, you know? I'm not an historian, I'm not a photojournalist, I'm not a researcher or a policeman. It's really with the position of an artist that I actually deal with this material. And what I like about them is that there's something pretty mysterious. They're all very simple, very humble, 10 by 15 photographic prints that could have appeared in Chinese family albums. And it's for people to actually look carefully again and eventually notice or not those patterns and those repetitions that I was quite obsessed with. I'm super excited about this exhibition because it's definitely the biggest I've done so far, and it's a great opportunity for me to show actually more things that I ever showed. So this show is created with many sections. The first one actually include more than 1,300 prints drawn from the collection, all treated the same way. So we're in this room where we can see actually the selection I've done for the last 17 years. But then it's presented as an archive. So there's this element of repetition and things are disorganized and people have to look and eventually find personal connection with the photos or connection between the photos. Then there's another room that's actually going to show other material from the Silvermine collection, things that I've collected not in the recycling plant, but things that I bought in flea markets or that I bought online, and that allows me to explore other kind of photography and other period of time in Chinese history. And the last section of the show actually presents the collaborations I've done with other artists over the last 10 years. So there's collaboration with English artist Melinda Gibson, with Chinese artist Lei Lei, with Japanese artist Kensuke Koike, and finally collaboration with Swedish artists Clara Karlström and Tobias Falt. Beijing Silvermine Archive is and will always remain analog photography archive because the genesis of it and what's so wonderful about it is the physicality of the image, of the film that was on the threshold of disappearing forever, that was actually rescued, and that allows us to discover a period of Chinese history in such a humble and beautiful way. And there is something quite magical, quite poetic about it that I cannot find with digital photography. I hope this project will never end because I hope these images will live and be shared and published and exposed forever. But there will be a significant event in the story of this project, and that will be the day I'll stop receiving bags of negatives. And that day will probably mean that the project somehow witnessed the death of analog photography in China.